welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. Today, we'll be looking at the first overpowered army build the community has homed in on. I am of course talking about the Fury of Ancients Rite of War, where you can take a full army of dreadnoughts. We already know that Contemptor dreadnoughts are batting above the average, so it just makes sense that an army full of them would get some serious work done. But am I stressing about the health of the game and what this means for tournaments? No, and neither should you. Just a quick note before we get into it, a subscribe and a like really helps us reach a bigger audience. So if you enjoyed the video, please hit those buttons down below. We've also set up our Blackbriar Gaming Instagram, so if you're interested in coming along on our hobby journey, check that out too. So what is all the fuss about? Let's look at the Guilty War. It's called Fury of Ancients. It is a generic Legiones Astartes Rite of War, and it reads, and I'm so excited today because for the first time, I'm actually reading out of the Heresy rulebooks while I record. So here we go. The effects. In a detachment using this Rite of War, Legion Contemptor Dreadnought Talons may be taken as troop choices. It means you're going to get more Dreadnoughts, right? Legion Contemptor Dreadnought Talons taken as compulsory troops in the detachment gain the line subtype. So not all of the Dreadnoughts taken as troops, just those taken as compulsory troops. But we're still talking quite a few Dreadnoughts that get the line subtype here. Now, a single Legion Contemptor Dreadnought Talon in the detachment, composed of only one Dreadnought, may be selected as the detachment's compulsory HQ choice. A Legion Contemptor Dreadnought Talon selected in this manner must take the Venerable Ancient upgrade for 30 points. Now, what does that do? Essentially, it gains the character subtype, it gains the Master of the Legion, and Eternal Warrior special rules, and an Iron Halo, increasing its invul save to 4+, which is quite nice. Now, the big one there is the Master of the Legion rule, which means you don't have to take a Praetor to take this Rite of War. You've got a Contemptor that's doing it for you. A Praetor Contemptor, if you will. Now, what are the limitations? All compulsory troops in a detachment using this Rite of War must be Legion Contemptor Dreadnought Talons, which of course you do anyway. No model with the Legiones Consularis special rule in a detachment using this Rite of War may select a console choice other than Legion Forge Lord, Legion Primus Medicae, or Legion Mortificator. Sure, you'd want Forge Lords, by the way. A detachment using this Rite of War may only include a single fast attack choice and a single heavy support choice that does not consist of models with the Dreadnought unit type. So you're going to be taking bulk Dreadnoughts, but of course that's what we want to do. A detachment using this Rite of War may not select any fortification choices. Fine. No Lord of War choices. Fine. And this Rite of War may only be selected for an army's primary detachment, so you can't have a cheeky allied Fury of the Ancients kicking around. An army whose primary detachment is using this Rite of War may not roll to seize the initiative. So if you don't get first player, you're definitely going second. You can't steal it on a cheeky 6. So that is the Ancients, Fury of Ancients Rite of War. A bit going on there. So why is it good? An army full of dreadnoughts just makes so much of the enemy armies redundant. Now, someone did the maths, I haven't done it myself, but when they're looking at a unit of 20 tactical marines, for instance, unloading on a dreadnought with all of their bolters, we're talking about 1 wound here. So that's an expensive unit, a few hundred points that's doing a single wound to your dreadnought. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that it's making the enemy armies or large portions of it redundant. Essentially, any unit that doesn't have a really high strength shooting or close combat attack, and one that ignores that 2+ armor save, forcing the dreadnought onto its invul, is going to be doing just barely anything to scratch your army. And while that doesn't have such a big impact when you only have maybe 1, 2, or even 3 dreadnoughts in an opponent's army, when your opponent's army is just all dreadnoughts and only a few of your units can do even anything to them, you're going to have some serious issues in trying to win that game, let alone play anything that resembles a close match. So the main reason here why it's good and why it pushes it over the top is the line unit subtype piece. So the compulsory troops choices, which I'm not going to start flicking through my book, but I believe that's 2 compulsory troops choices there. So 2 of your Dreadnought Talons are going to be able to gain the line unit subtype. That's a maximum of 6 Dreadnoughts that we're talking about there. That means they can play the objective game. So one would usually think an army like this isn't going to be powerful because they're not going to be able to play most of the missions and actually get those victory points. In this case, they're going to be able to do a pretty decent job of it. So it isn't all of the dreadnoughts in this army, and if a canny opponent tries and singles out those line unit subtype dreadnoughts to take them out and make sure the opponent can't then score, that's definitely a thing, and it might be a bit of a counter to it, but essentially with up to 6 dreadnoughts kicking around that are still able to score and capture objectives and impact the objectives in that scoring manner, that's what's really pushing this Rite of War over the top. Now, furthermore, it's not even that hard to put together. So often these really gimmicky Rites of War that are super powerful are either really expensive to put together or involve a whole lot of really niche units that are hard to model or to paint or to do. Really common cases are really big horde armies, right? So really big horde armies can often be really powerful, but painting 300 miniatures sucks. Not to mention buying all of those miniatures. Now, in this case, that's just not true. So the Contemptor Dreadnoughts, because they're in the Age of Darkness box set, I see them going for about $60 to $70 dues at the moment on Facebook Marketplace. So if you're getting maybe a 10 in an army, that's only, and I say only, we're talking heresy here, people, that's only $600 to put together almost a whole army. That's not that expensive when looking at other ways of doing it. And furthermore, you're then only painting 10, albeit quite large, miniatures. So it's quite easy to paint as well. So the hobby aspect of this is quite easy. It's quite accessible from that point of view, which makes it quite an attractive choice, noting that it's quite powerful as well. So all of these factors come together mean we've got a bit of an issue. So this Rite of War is really powerful. It's an army that's easy to put together. It can still play the mission game and smash face of the opponent's army. So let's talk quickly about what this army might look like. So in a 3,000 point army, which is kind of the standard for Heresy, you're gonna get a lot of Contemptors. That's your first go. So why are Contemptors good? I'm not going to go into that in any real depth. Anyone that's looked at the rulebook can probably answer that for themselves. They've moved to wounds from the old edition, so they're no longer a vehicle that can be even luckily one-shotted anymore. A las cannon's just going to do a single wound to it instead of potentially ending its life. So they've got these 6 wounds, they've got high toughness, the Contemptor, I think toughness 7, and then you go up from there if you start looking at the Leviathan, which is nuts. You've got high weapon skill and ballistic skill, so a weapon skill of 5 in this game is huge, and that makes hitting it in close combat quite difficult for the majority of units that aren't veterans or specialized troops. The biggest bit here, and I think the biggest impact from its rules, is this 2+ save that it's picked up. So vehicles traditionally do not get an armor save, which means, which balances it all out. But now that we've got these really tough units with a lot of wounds that are comparatively cheap, points-wise, and they have this 2+ armor save, I think a 3+ armor save would have really evened this unit out, but it's not what GW did. They went for the 2+ save, so that things like missiles and a lot of your anti-tank weapons, which are AP3, are bouncing off this thing. Missiles do almost nothing. 10 missiles from a unit do almost nothing to a dreadnought of this type and this description. So furthermore, even those weapons that are getting past that 2+ armor save, the Contemptors kick in with a cheeky 5+ invul anyway. So that's the Contemptor Dreadnought. That's why it's tough. They're hard to take down. They're hard to shoot off the board. They're really great. And when you give them the line unit subtype, they're just ridiculous. So the core of this 3,000 point army is going to involve a whole bunch of these. So you're probably looking at between 7, 8, maybe a dozen Contemptor Dreadnoughts in this army, depending on how you kit it out. The support for this army, you're then going to be looking at Leviathans, because of course the heavy choices, you can only pick one that isn't a Dreadnought, so why would you not just lean in and go bulk Dreadnoughts? So you're looking at Leviathans for that really closer range, heavy firepower that can just delete units off the table, whether they be tanks or elite infantry. You're looking at I want to say Doritos every single time. It's Deradeos, which are those long-range support dreadnoughts, which is great. Means they're throwing down some fire from the backfield and holding your backfield as well. Even though they don't have the line unit subtype, they still count as denial if the enemy manages to get behind your wall of advancing dreadnoughts. You might want to chuck in some Forge Lords or some Tech Marines to heal your dreadnoughts up, just to be really obnoxious if your opponent does manage to do some wounds. And maybe you might be looking at some tactical squads or assault squads. Certainly if I was going a balanced route with this Rite of War, I'd be looking at some tactical squads and assault squads just to grab some objectives while my Contemptors are busy mincing my opponent's army. You don't need them, obviously. You've got the unit, the line subtype elsewhere, but if you want to be a bit tricky, having those infantry is not the worst thing. Though you're then losing out on that whole denying the enemy's army situation. Now they can shoot some infantry and their army can actually do something with some of their weapons that otherwise would be wasted against your Contemptors. So purely Dreadnoughts is the way to do it, in my opinion. So let's look at what legions do this better than others. Now the Iron Hands are the obvious favourite here. They get -1 shooting to all shooting attacks, which will have an impact on the weapons that are best at taking down Dreadnoughts. We're talking about plasma weapons here, melter weapons, and las cannons. You're essentially losing out on about 17% of effectiveness for each of those weapons when it comes to shooting at your Dreadnoughts, which is big. They're already struggling, and Iron Hands just make it that much more difficult for them. The other legion, which I think does some great work in the Dreadnought space, is Sons of Horus. So instead of making them shooting in tougher, they're making them shooting... let's try that again. They're making them tougher in close combat. Now they do that with a -1 strength to close combat attacks in turns that your Dreadnoughts charge or are charged. Now even big units of Terminators aren't feeling so confident about charging into a whole talon of Contemptors anymore when they're at -1 strength. I'm not sure, and someone please put down in the comments below, I haven't checked, and that's lazy of me, but I'm not sure if that -1 strength is before the Power Fist comes into action, or if it happens afterwards. Please someone let me know in the comments, because if it's before, and your Power Fists are now only strength 6, that is rough. That is seriously rough. Whereas taking them just down to strength 7 isn't as bad for obvious reasons. Now, I actually think there's another legion, a sneaky one, if you will, that does bulk Dreadnoughts even better, though I probably wouldn't go down the Fury of the Ancients Rite of War, but you could. I won't go into it in any serious depth, that's almost a video on its own, but if you're curious, I think the Alpha Legion, with Alfarius' ability to give any unit deep strike, not just infantry, any unit, I think that could go just nuts on some Contemptor Talons. So I think deep striking Contemptor Talons that can charge on the turn they come down while being scoring units, it's just insane. Imagine 2 or maybe 3 Contemptor Talons, each with 2 or 3 Dreadnoughts, deep striking and assaulting into an opponent's army. That's going to just do so much work, and there's nothing your opponent can do about it. Even Overwatch with the majority of their army is just going to do nothing if you pick the units smartly that you're charging into. So there we go. Those are legions. Iron Hand, Sons of Horus, and just a cheeky left field Alpha Legion, because always Alpha Legion, are probably the way these are going to be run. Are there any hard counters to this army is probably the next question we want to look at. The answer is yes and no. So an all Terminator army taken by Sons of Horus, they probably do it best, is going to give this army probably a run for its money. It's full of Power Fists, full of Chain Fists. A Wordbearer's army as well, full of Galvor back, might be able to hold its own. The Galvor back are not going to be instant killed by those Dreadnought close combat weapons, I believe. Didn't check it. I think that's right though. Then they've each got 3 wounds, right? So it's going to take Contemptors quite a bit of time to mince through them, while you can get some sneaky Power Fists into those Galvor back units. Same. An Iron Warrior army that has gone heavy on anti-armored firepower is going to have a really good crack at this. But even then, in these niche circumstances, these matchups are certainly not one-sided. So just taking the Iron Warriors as a good example, if you do the Math Hammer on a heavy sports squad armed with 10 las cannons, and that is an expensive squad, team, even in the best of circumstances, and so night fighting, let's hope night fighting's not on, because then you're really screwed, and geez, you better believe that Fury of the Ancient player is going to be pushing for night fighting. But let's say that's not on. You've got great circumstances, you've got a nice, beautiful open shot to that Dreadnought with your 10 las cannons. Even then, and please correct me if my maths is wrong, you're not going to be taking out a single Contemptor Dreadnought in a turn with that 10 las cannon squad. Not with the way the stats go. So they're just tough. They're so tough. I would love to be wrong about this. So I'd love for Fury of the Ancients armies to not be that powerful. If people disagree with me, please let me know in the comments. But I'm thinking they're winning most of their games, 9 out of 10, if not better than that. I don't think I'm wrong. So if I'm not, and this army is broken, the next thing I want to discuss is, does this actually matter? And in short, no, I don't think it does. And here's why. People who have played 40k for the last decade or so, and the kind of tournaments that game system encourages, may at this point be really stressing out. How can my balanced and narrative-driven army have any fun at a tournament that will be full of these Dreadnought-filled monstrosities? Let me help you out. Take a breath. You're simply not going to see these armies kicking around that often, and not at any decent heresy events. And here's 5 reasons why. The first one is self-regulation, or as I like to call it, the don't be a jerk rule, and there's some other expletives you could throw in there. The heresy community has been dealing with this situation for years. In any wargame, there are always going to be better army lists. Sometimes rules come together to make those army lists way better than they have any right to be. Horus Heresy is no different from any of those other wargames, and never has been, but the community has really pushed this culture of self-regulation. If at any point you're looking at an army list that you've put together, and you're thinking, this is going to destroy everything in its way, then you're probably failing at that self-regulation piece and possibly moving into jerk territory. So just keep that in mind when you're building army lists, and keep remembering to ask that question. If we all ask it, we're not going to have this issue. Next, narrative gaming. I've always said that competitive wargaming is a bit of a contradiction. If you want to play a competitive game that isn't sports, play something like chess. Something that's not asymmetric. Horus Heresy, due to the nature of its system and its rich background, has always been about playing to the lore of your legions and the story of the greatest betrayal the galaxy has ever known. We're not here to play a competitive wargame. We're here to have fun. We're here to play the lore, the narrative. Luckily, the majority of Heresy gamers just aren't that interested in building the most powerful army lists. It's not a question they're asking, and it's not something they care about. We have this amazing culture of narrative gaming, and I think it's so important that we make sure that culture continues, and we help new players adopt it in encouraging and positive ways. So not gatekeeping, that's a whole nother issue, but there's encouraging and positive ways to help people adopt that culture, to communicate that culture that's around hobby, that's about narrative, and to make sure that new people, 40k players, other new gamers coming into this system, to make sure that they're jumping into that culture as well, making it their own. Number 3, Heresy tournament organizers. Now there's always going to be outliers here. There's certain wargaming individuals that just can't help themselves. We all know one, they exist. In these cases, you'll be happy to know that there are a whole bunch of experienced tournament organizers out there who have been putting player packs together with certain restrictions for years. There are so many ways a few sentences in an event player pack could handle this issue. Something like, no Fury of the Ancients Rite of War. Now, I don't think that's the best way to go. I think you could definitely build a Fury of the Ancients Rite of War in a fun, balanced, and interesting way. Maybe you only have 6 dreadnoughts instead of 12. I don't think just banning Rites of War and army builds is the best way to go. I think that's a slippery slope and can lead to negative experiences. People building that army, for instance, turning up to a tournament and realizing they can't play because they missed that sentence. That sucks, right? There are plenty of ways to write into a player's pack to make sure that doesn't happen and to make sure these armies don't exist, but it's not my preferred method, so just putting that out there, but it is a way to go if things get dire and things get desperate, and tournament organizers, TOs, if you will, have to take that route. Now, number 4, event structure. This is my preferred way of doing it. Now, my favorite event type that easily deals with this situation is the sandbox-style casual tournament that lets players choose their own matchups and just play the way they want to play. The TO, they kind of put a narrative structure around the event, they set up a bunch of different tables, they create some kind of loose points-based system that no one really cares about anyway, and they just let the players go nuts. I've always had such fun at these events with grudge matches playing out and a lot of shenanigans ensuing. I highly recommend it. If you haven't been to this type of event, or you're a TO and you haven't run this type of event before, give it a thought, give it a think. Old mate who's turned up with their box full of Contemptor dreadnoughts is going to get the hint pretty quickly when no one wants to play them. And it's going to be a bit of a sad moment where they're sitting in the corner holding their box while everyone else has fun. And hopefully that kind of then moves into that step of self-regulation. It encourages it in a different way. So that's number 4. Number 5 is that it's just kind of boring. While a whole army of dreadnoughts may look really cool, and it does, it's also pretty boring. There's just so many interesting and fun units in Heresy that I don't think many players out there are going to be drawn to throwing a dozen Contemptors onto the table. The idea of building an Iron Hands army and not taking an absolute beast and all-round cool guy that is Ferrus Manus is just unthinkable in my mind. Same, Gorgon Terminators. Have you seen how good those miniatures look? Suddenly, you've spent 1,000 points and you just don't have room for that many dreadnoughts anymore. Horus Heresy is such a hobby-rich environment that draws players because of the amazing miniatures and the story they tell. A wall of Contemptor dreadnoughts just isn't going to be appealing to that many players of this game. Now, even considering all of these things, there will still be those that can't help themselves and they feel the need to smash face with their horde of dreads. So what would I do if I came up against a Fury of the Ancients army that wasn't just 6 dreadnoughts? 6 dreadnoughts I can deal with, okay, sure, but was a good 12 or 15 Contemptor dreadnoughts chucking down on the table. So this is what I'd do. I would play that opponent. I would smile, I'd remain calm, I will no doubt lose spectacularly in the first few turns, and at the end of the game, I'm going to shake their hand, and while packing up my beautifully themed army, I'm going to explain to them that their army is, and I'm going to explain this so politely, that their army might be a bit over the top. We're all just here to have fun, and I think it might be a bit powerful for the theme of the event, and maybe I suggest some ways to tone it down. Perhaps by adding a tactical squad or two. Just a Marine. Just give me a single Marine on the table. Now, if they don't appreciate that advice, I'm going to wish them well, and I'm going to walk away. Now, remember, the wargaming community is a small place. We all know each other. If I happen to find myself at another event and bet against this same player with their Fury of Ancients army, I would simply let the TO know that I would prefer to forfeit that particular game. Perhaps I even ask the TO at the start of the day not to match me up against them. We're not here for sheep stations, people. Taking a loss isn't going to ruin your wargaming career. Now, if every player refuses to engage with them, it's cold, it's a bit cold, it feels almost like bullying, but that's Dreadnought spamming guy, they might take away the tournament and they might win the tournament on that day, but we can also hope that they're going to take away a valuable life lesson that sometimes being a good guy and having fun is more important than winning. Only the most determined of psychopaths is going to keep turning up to events where no one's going to play against them. But I hear you screaming, Charles, that's not fair. Fury of the Legion, it's in the rulebook. Fury of the Ancients, I should say. It's in the rulebook. It's part of the rules. How dare you not play against them? That's not reasonable. We are talking about a game here with a million different interactions, people. Game designers are going to get it wrong every now and again, or there's going to be things they miss. Even the most balanced game in the world has to have a best option, and it has to have a worst option. So I'd ask all of you to have a good look at how you're planning your armies, and ask yourself the question, would you want to play against it with a balanced force? And when I say balanced force, I want you to think about those white dwarfs in the early 2000s where you'd open them up and you'd have, maybe still, I don't know, I haven't looked at one for a while. You open them up and you have a look at those beautiful armies in the white dwarfs that are playing against each other in the battle reports, and they've got a few tanks, they've got a few troop units, they've got an assault squad, they've got some Terminators, and they've got a cool character. That's what I think when I think balanced. I think white dwarf style. Now, ask yourself the question, would you want to play against this army that you're building with a balanced force? I'm not even asking whether that balanced force would win 50% of the time. It's more the question of whether they would even want to put their miniatures on the table and have a good, honest go. If the answer is no, then maybe give it a tweak. Just self-regulate, people. We play wargames to have fun, so let's help each other out and all have fun together. That brings us to the end of our Heresy Chats for today. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments what you would do to take down a Fury of the Ancients army, and whether you think it's broken or merely on the powerful side of the curve. Importantly, make sure to keep rolling those dice and getting hyped for Heresy.